You've come here to stare at me, to gape and point, and go home with that smug comfort that you'll never end up like me. Just so long as this glass is between us. You wouldn't be saying those things if we were in a room together, palm to palm, with no glass, and no idea of what the creature might do next. It's a rather frightening idea. You might be scared, fluttery, if I ever got as close as to touch you. But that's the only thing I ever wanted. For her to take my hand and hold it. And did I get it? No. But I am getting ahead of myself. When I was little, I used to love to play with my cats. That was until one of them clawed me and I bled. So I ran to my mother seeking comfort, and I got the love and comfort that I needed to help calm me. However, in the following story, the narrator doesn't have that luxury. Her own mother finds her repulsive and doesn't even think of her as her own daughter, just a creature. She struggles with the physical absence of her mother until it's too much to bear. See how she copes in My Mother's Touch by Lauren D. Yee. I was born on the 13th. I have been told often that my mother cried for days after I was born. You see, the doctors couldn't get me out the natural way, the normal way. So they had to take their pretty knives and cut open her smooth white belly, slashing it down the middle. For years, she used to cry whenever I asked her how I was born. She had said that if she had known they were going to cut her open, she would never have had a child in the first place. You see, when she was younger, my mother was a pretty thing, the type that construction workers would see and lick their lips at. They could just taste the pretty honey dripping from her small white fingers. And you know, I've never had that problem myself. You see, my mother kept all of her pretty genes to herself, hoarding them, so that when people looked at us side by side, they would wonder what horrible accident had caused such a beautiful woman to give birth to such an unsightly creature. I only had to take one look at her tiny pale hands and know mine would never be like that. Keep your hands to yourself, was what she told me when I was 5. I had been finger painting and I reached up to her for a hug, for warmth. But as soon as my yellow and red painted fingers touched her blouse, she screamed and she pushed me away. I was dirty. I would stain her blouses, soil her skin. Sometimes I would annoy her, just so she would pull back her hand and slap me with the smooth flat of her palm. I still remember the feel of her cool hands against my cheek, stinging a little. But most of the time, my mother kept her hands to herself. She would shudder whenever she had to take my dry, spidery fingers into hers. This continued for years, and then one day there was a fire. It started innocently in the kitchen where she was cooking, but fires can be tricky things, and soon the entire room rose in smoke, and my mother ran out of the house, clutching her apron for fear that the flames, just like my fingers, might dirty her dress. And of course, it never occurred to her that I might still be up in my room sleeping as the flames crept under the door and sucked at my skin. A firefighter pulled me out. But too late. Always too late. You know, I'll never forget the feel of the flames licking against my back as I lay there. It was like death by 1,000 cuts. Only I had survived. You know, I think my mother cried when they pulled me out. You know, I had survived and she'd have to continue to live with this monstrosity. I was in the hospital for 2 months while my skin slowly rotted away under the bandages. And after the accident, instead of becoming numb, the sensitivities and fingers increased, and I hungered for a warm palm against mine, a warm body that would keep me from falling. But to my mother, I was even more hideous, deformed. I resembled a melted candle, my skin hanging off of me like loose parchment. She wouldn't even come near me. She sat on the other side of the hospital room as if my touch would sear her beautiful skin. And when I returned home, she hired a woman to change my bandages for her, just so she wouldn't have to touch my charred and dripping skin. You know, I had been a fool to think that she'd care, that she would love me. After so many years, I had finally become this hideous creature that my mother always saw me as. I'll bet my deformed image haunted her in her sleep. She had so many nightmares after I came back. My mother was the prettiest thing when asleep. She used to lay out on the couch in her best pearls after she got home from work, and she lay so still that you could have sworn she wasn't breathing. But if you got close, really close, you'd be able to see her tiny shallow breaths bobbing up and down, like ripples in a lake. That was the only time I could touch her, the only time I could feel her delicate fingerprints against my cheek. That was the only time I ever felt safe and loved. But one day, as I sat beside her, she woke up and saw that I, the filthy creature that I was, had dared to touch her beautiful skin. So she screamed. My own mother screamed because she couldn't bear the thought of my clumsy and blistered fingers against her swan-like throat. All I could think of was stopping her screaming, her horrible screaming, because then she would realize that maybe she could love me, maybe she would hold me. So I held her throat fast in place. I pinned her to the couch in her best pearls until she stopped screaming. And then I could hold her for as long as I wanted. And I didn't have to worry about her screaming. I didn't have to worry about her screaming. But eventually, they took her away in a black bag zipped up snug like a cocoon. When they buried her into the soft, wet ground, you could still see the blue-black hand imprints on her milky white neck. My hands. And then they took me away to here. A white house, just like my old one. Clean walls and shiny floors. Everything is clean here. Even my clothes are clean. And just like everyone else's. For once, I am the same. I am unbelievably, perfectly, and wonderfully normal. And twice a day, once in the morning and once before bed, a woman comes in and she feeds the sweetest medicine in my arm, like a mother feeding her baby. And while she does it, she holds my arm steady, and for a moment, just a moment, I am safe and warm. So stare all you want, because I have finally gotten what I had always wanted. To be held, to be touched, and to be loved.